Seats. Let me introduce you our third and final speaker, Senior Police Officer Thomas Sutton Jr. He is the Technical Manager of Integrated Video Support Unit at the Atlanta Police Department. 90% of the people here are from the Atlanta metro area, and we certainly extend our appreciation to the APD. There are several members of APD here. Let's go back to Officer Sutton again. He has been at the Atlanta Police Department for 16 years now. And he is going to share with us something that's near and dear to us, and that is the recent 53rd Super Bowl, some lessons learned. He's going to share these lessons learned in APD CCTV preparation for Super Bowl 53. Additionally, he will elaborate on what the APD Operation Shield is and how the nearly 11,000 cameras throughout metro area are integrated into the Video Integration Center to help APD prevent and solve crimes. And he will make sure that we have about 10 minutes or so where you can ask just about any question, not just about this particular topic. So we will make sure we fill all this time up till lunchtime at 12:30. So with that, please welcome Officer Thomas Sutton Jr.
Thank you. All right. Thank you. Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to talk to you in the beginning about what Operation Shield is for the city of Atlanta, and then I will get into the specifics about Super Bowl. So Operation Shield is a mayoral project that began under the previous administration to be able to have a lot of public and private resources pulled together to be able to help both solve crimes, be more proactive in the police department, as well as improve the quality of life in the city of Atlanta. So that doesn't affect just the residents, that affects all of the different visitors that we have, as we have millions each year coming to Atlanta. So how did we create it, though? That's the big question. The brainstorming began basically in 2008. You had a lot of the command staff as well as leadership throughout the city visiting other areas, other municipalities, other countries that had some type of security center or some type of operation center that would be centered on video to begin with. But the idea was we don't want to remain only on video. There are other things that can be useful in the converged world, in the world of protecting citizens. So with that, we had to figure out, how are we going to fund something like this? New York, for instance, was funded through the federal government after, unfortunately, the 9/11 attacks to be able to help get a center together that pulled in multiple different resources, both public and private, into one center, but that was a large pool of money that was given to them to do that. The city of Atlanta wants to be more responsible with funds. All funds are coming, other than what was donated. Funds are actually citizens, government funds. You get what I'm saying. Basically, I'm trying to say we're being responsible with spending your money, right? So in doing that, we had to figure out how can we responsibly create a center that can be proactive and continue to go long-term without having too much operational cost. So in doing that, the first grant or fund we had was donated by a particular donor. You saw the name on the first slide. Thankfully, the Loudermilks donated $1 million. That helped us get the foundation established. That created the actual Video Integration Center itself, as well as the equipment that was needed to be able to begin the whole operation. Well, we had to think, okay, this is going to be a 24/7 operation. This is not something that's just during the daytime hours. How are we going to get this information to the different zone commanders, to the different resources that we have that are needed? So we made sure that from day one, the center was not isolated, which is what you have in some areas. You want this information to be able to be pushed to each individual zone precinct. In our case, that's how the geographic boundaries are broken up. But we also wanted to be able to make sure that the command bus, essentially it's a large RV. If you have a major operation going on, SWATs needed to be called. They're not physically connected by a wire to the center. How are you going to get that information to them? So we had to be able to share much of this together and do it in a way that would not be cost restrictive to the city of Atlanta. So it was already said that we have access to almost 11,000 cameras now. The city owns less than 10% of that. That's how we are able to make sure that we keep our costs down. It would be extremely expensive for us to deploy 11,000 cameras considering the maintenance that's involved in it. Equipment dies all the time. Just like you've heard from Mike and John before me, there are different levels of failures that can occur, whether they're physical or technological. You have to make sure you account for that. So with software life cycles and the private partners that are sharing with us, that helped keep our costs to a minimum. What's involved in it? Well, you have the infrastructure, you have cameras, and you have a video management system. Those are your core portions of it. So we all are familiar with, you buy a camera, make sure it reaches the specs that you want, you're going to deploy it. We're not deploying cameras in one spot, in one building. Essentially, imagine it as like a large college campus, but expanded. You're talking about the entire city of Atlanta. How are we going to bring all these different resources together? That we use a software technology called a PSIM. That's just a term. It stands for Physical Security Information Management. So what that software does is essentially acts as a client as many different video management systems. So you have your Genitex, your OnSSI, your Vigilon, whatever your video management systems are that are out there. Well, party A was not going to necessarily communicate with party B. They're competitors. You'd expect that. But a PSIM helps bring all of those together into a giant sandbox. That way, our operators are able to work from a unified platform that can actually layer the resources as needed. We can see where our private partner cameras are. We can see where patrol cars are. We can see where license plate readers or vehicle detection devices happen to be. Various different things together in a layered, unified manner that makes it a more sensible way of responding to both events as well as preparing to handle different things that are coming up. For instance, Super Bowl. So the cameras, how do we connect to them? Fiber optics, wireless technologies, wireless mesh, 4G, cellular connectivity. These are all options, and we actually use all of them. They have their different uses. I won't say that any one is better than the others because they can all be compromised. They all have issues. You can have the fastest camera out there on fiber optics until somebody severs a cable by mistake. Same thing with wireless mesh. There's many different companies out there, and when things are deployed correctly, you will have pretty much a rock solid connection, but you can still have interference somehow. 4G, well, how many of you have unlimited data plans? Imagine what cameras do to it. So it's all a cohesive plan. It's not any one cookie cutter, this is how you go about creating a center. You have to go ahead and create a hybrid and figure out what's going to be the best mix for your environment and what you need. As a matter of fact, if you have a smaller contained area, I would even say you might not need a PSIM. You might just need the features of a professional VMS. VMS systems, technologies over time have improved greatly to where a lot of the features that you have in a PSIM are actually available in these various manufacturers. So you have to really sit down and plan beforehand and determine what it is you want to do. For instance, the cameras that you see here, these are not the initial cameras we first started with. We've changed several times over the years. So for the Super Bowl, we deployed what you see up here in the middle. That was a camera that essentially has 4 lenses fixed around in that spaceship-looking bubble, along with a PTZ in the middle. Well, those 4 fixed cameras are giving you a 360-degree coverage, minus the pole that it may be on. So you always have a fixed view of what's happening in an area, as well as we're able to zoom in on any specific target that we need to, as needed. So the differences between a PSIM and a VMS software, they're becoming blurred over time, but that's actually a good thing. That's a good thing for consumers, that's a good thing for the citizens, because that means that there's improvement in technology. You never want to stay stagnant, as even some of the previous speakers have mentioned. Things evolve. We have to evolve with it. How did we come about this? Well, the first thing, like I said, all the different meetings, we had to understand what was the common goal. What was it that the city was trying to do with a video integration center, with Operation Shield? Well, we were trying to be a force multiplier, find a way to enhance the resources that you already have. We always would say, hey, we'd love to hire more police officers, but that takes time. It takes time, and plus it also, part of that is just the nature of what happens over time. When nationwide, and this is not anything unique to Atlanta, if you have things that are publicized or the media is taking hold of negative things in policing, it tends to lower the desire to become a police officer. So background and recruitment would have a harder time getting people to join on. Well, if you have a device, a camera, a resource that's out there helping keep an eye on things in an area, and you have a center where you have people viewing and responding to 911 calls or whatever else that's alerting them that something is going on, you've actually increased your police department's response. Not response time, but how they're able to respond. That's what I meant by a force multiplier. So, aligning mission with partner expectations. What is that? Think of how many times you tell somebody, or somebody says, I have the latest and greatest product, and we can take care of everything for you, no problem. It's a pie in the sky type dream, but if you go ahead and manage what you're selling to a person or what you're telling them you're going to do in the beginning, manage those expectations, say, hey, look, our software or what we're going to do can reach this point, not that point yet. We'll work towards that. They can understand that there's going to be progressions, milestones. There's going to be a path to how you get to that point, but it's not instantaneous. So that's an important discussion you need to have up front to manage what's going on. Sharing common resources that benefit more than one entity. Well, in the city of Atlanta, we have many different private partners that share their surveillance resources with us. That's how we were able to grow. The understanding, though, is we're being able to have a better awareness of what's happening. So any particular area, and I don't want to name any particular governmental entity or private partner, if there's something that is occurring in an area that's near one of their resources and we're able to see it, that helps us determine how we need to respond. Where do we send our resources? That's mutually beneficial, because now that other entity can say, hey, look, we're being responsible enough to make sure that law enforcement is able to respond with as much knowledge as possible. Don't hold on to this knowledge and cause more of a, let's just say, confusion on a response time. Establish an IT point of contact. What do I mean by that? Well, with these partnerships, typically you have your corporate leaders or your top chain of command in whatever the organization. They understand what it is that you're trying to do and that you want to share resources, but they sometimes, when it's time to make some other decisions, may not understand what the implication is on their network, their resources. So sometimes you have to have direct contact with an IT person on that other side. I do not mean sidestep chain of command. Make sure you understand, that's not what I'm saying. But what I do mean is if you have somebody who you can discuss and say, here's what it is I'm trying to do. Here is what our topology happens to be and how we're trying to share things together. Sometimes that IT person can actually be the best resource to speak to because they can actually relay that information up as well. It goes up and down through the ladder. So that was just a brief overview of Operation Shield. I didn't want to bore you too much with that. I'm going to make sure I get you guys to lunch quick. What you really wanted to talk about is Super Bowl and what were the lessons learned. Super Bowl 53. Of course, Atlanta was the host city. You've had definitely well over 1 million people that had visited the area in order to enjoy the festivities, not just of the Super Bowl itself, but all of the different things that led up to it. You had various different concerts and a lot of gatherings that went on in the city that brought millions of people here, which is its own strain. And one, anybody who knows or travels through traffic every day understands what it's like on a normal day. Imagine when you have roads closed down specifically for foot traffic. It was even difficult for us. So this is just a picture of the flyover. If you remember in the beginning of the Super Bowl, you had the jets flying over there. This is just one intersection in the city, and I was trying to capture what it looks like from some of our new cameras. The cameras actually have high quality. I'm zoomed way out on that, but it could zoom in all the way to that Mercedes-Benz Stadium from where it was and be able to pick up detail of what's going on. But yet, at the same time, just like on the earlier slide, that little spaceship that I mentioned, it was seeing what was happening right around it at all times. So we would not have lost sight of what's going on. And that's another goal of the city of Atlanta, to go ahead and be able to get that extra visibility, which would help assist us in whatever is going on if we need to investigate something or just be aware of what's happening. When we have major events like the Peachtree Road Race or the Peach Drop, which is the annual New Year's festivities, things like this help us be able to be more aware and be more proactive as to what's going on. Well, how are we going to do that? How are we going to ensure that the right team is selected before your project kickoff? How are we going to get to this point? First, you're going to need to get a lot of your internal IT resources together. You're going to have to say, hey, look, this is what we want to do. How are we going to get there? A subject matter expert, both hardware and software, I would recommend you have that internally, because you're going to have vendors, and I will say that the vendor that we had help with the Super Bowl was excellent. It wasn't the one we had in the very beginning when we first created the Operation Shield, but you have to have somebody in your organization that you can trust to be essentially that trusted advisor that Mike Howard mentioned of, that can guide you through what's being sold to you. Because a vendor will say, I have all the bells and whistles, I can take care of everything that you need, and they might have 50% of it, but how do you get the other 50%? So sometimes making sure that you have someone internal will definitely be that beneficial to your overall success of what you're trying to do. Project managers, it goes without a doubt, you already know what that is. Solutions integrator. For Super Bowl, ours was GC&E. Thank you guys too, because you did a great job. Honestly, because when you don't do a great job, what happens? You see it in the media, it's on social media right away. How many have heard of any negative things about the Super Bowl in Atlanta? None. I had hair at once, but Super Bowl came. But we did make sure that everything went successful. All citizens were safe, all visitors, all residents, everything externally went on without a hitch. And yeah, I said it that way. But anyway, the vendor support, that is important. One of the big issues, what we have to deal with, everyone's thinking about, okay, well, you have crowds in the area. This particular video was at Andrew Young International Boulevard and Centennial Olympic Park. I was just showing a clip, a 1-minute clip of what it was like in the area, and this was during the daytime. This was before the Super Bowl, the day before. So you still had more concerts and stuff going on, a lot of fanfare, a lot of people coming. Of course, when you have many more people in an area, you're also going to have that much more congestion on your wireless networks if you're using wireless devices. whether that's 4G, wireless mesh, whatever it happens to be. Of course, you can account for a certain amount of volume or a certain density in the beginning, but you have to also think 20 years ago, it was kind of a luxury to have a cell phone. You know, a person might have one cell phone and they felt really great on what they can do. Nowadays, you have a business or organizational issue a cell phone, a person has their own personal cell phone, probably have a tablet or iPad, laptop. Your cars have Wi-Fi in them sometimes. There's a lot of different things out there that cause RF or radio frequency congestion, and you need to account for that beforehand. We actually had a challenge with that. The RF actually worked very well for what we were doing, but I would say that we had one of those three-letter organizations actually reach out to us and say, hey, do you have something in a particular area? And we addressed it. Things were taken care of. As you can see, like I said, nothing happened. Everything was taken care of. But that can build up very quickly if you're not careful. Same location, just a few hours later. Just like I mentioned, when you have that many different devices in an area, you could now start to lose connectivity to your devices if you were not careful of planning your original design, if you weren't making sure that the resources that you need were in place. But it goes beyond just those technical resources. What about the physical? See, the fluorescent vests, those are police officers in there. If something was to happen, we had physical resources in everywhere pedestrians were likely to be to make sure that we were ready to respond. That's another key thing. You can't just all depend just on technology. Still need to have the boots on the ground. And APD made sure that coverage was available the entire time that the Super Bowl period was in effect, and did a great job at that. So this is also just showing some of the capabilities of the PTZ cameras that was in the middle of that spaceship. So you can see they're zooming in around on the Olympic rings and different people that are there gathering in Centennial Olympic Park during this time. Granted, we didn't zoom all the way in, but you could. One of the issues about placement of cameras or things you need to think about is you notice how blurry all of a sudden that particular camera became. It's a bright projection screen, essentially, that was out there in the Centennial Olympic Park trying to show some of the concert activities. Cameras can adjust for that, but you just have to make sure your operators know, okay, I need to zoom a little bit further or zoom out, give the camera the opportunity, the technology, the opportunity to do what it's supposed to do. It cleared right up. But the biggest challenge was more traffic, really, foot traffic, vehicular traffic being bound up more than any technology issue. So you have to be able to respond to that quickly. The Atlanta streetcar, the trolley you saw sitting there, where's it going? Well, you're gonna have to wait until we can get enough people out of the way to move along this particular track. That was more of the concerns. But one of the other things you have to consider too is if you have devices that use alternate power sources. For instance, if you wanted to put a camera resource in a remote area or an area that does not have necessarily connections for power, you may have to use solar power or some type of alternate power source. That's a great idea, but anybody who's been here for the last year realize we have had an unusually rainy season, rainy year. There's been a lot of cloudy days. Things like that actually strain the capability or capacity for the use of solar power. Doesn't make it invalid for use, but just understand that these are things you have to think about beforehand. In our case, things that we had with solar power, we already made sure that they had what they call shore power, the ability to plug up to an electric outlet somewhere. So the police department was forecasting what could happen and making sure we sat down with the NFL, we sat down with all the different stakeholders and go through tabletop exercises prior to the Super Bowl to see what would happen and make sure that we had answers, as John had mentioned, make sure we have answers for what could happen and are able to respond quickly. So that ended up being something that was very useful for us. So how do we deal with decisions of, what happens, prioritizing your needs over your desires. What I'm getting at on this was saying there are times when you may have a leader, you may be a president of your organization, maybe a chief in the police department, whatever it happens to be, says, hey, I want this particular resource deployed here, or I want something to happen. You have to be forthcoming, especially if you're in the role of a trusted advisor. Be forthcoming with telling them what the true possibilities are. Don't just say, okay, I can do it. How many times have you heard somebody say, yeah, I could take care of that? And then they turn around, how do we do that? If you can't see how it's going to happen, don't just say, yes, we can. Just say, okay, let me get back with you, or I'll let you know. If you know for sure that something is not going to be a success, let them know so you can come up with alternates. That doesn't mean that you're squashing what they want. It's just you're being realistic with them, meeting those expectations or setting the expectations. So I also have be extremely careful or mindful of changes that are not in your initial design. Anything that you're deploying, of course, you're going to come up with your original site plan, your design, whatever you want to call it. For the Super Bowl, we made sure that several months prior to it, we had set a technology freeze, meaning at a certain point, make no major changes to your infrastructure, your core systems, to make sure that nothing happened and that everything stayed stable, which works well, but sometimes you may have to make some other maintenance adjustments, or there might be something that's specific that needs to happen. You need to make sure you have a process on how that's going to work and a fallback if you need to. We did make sure we were successful in that. There were some other things that we did that enhanced our capabilities during the Super Bowl, but that's something that was done on the fly, and you have to make sure that you are ready for the consequences. Understand that there's risk involved anytime you make a change, especially during an actual active time period. The city, we were ready for that. So that last one where I was saying sometimes you just have to tell someone no, that's basically saying the BSOD, blue screen of death, and everybody who has Windows or have used Windows computers has seen it at some point in time. That's what could happen if you make a change that you're not prepared for. You can actually shut down your entire system. Make sure that doesn't happen by setting that technology freeze period and parameters on that beforehand. So the task, tackle the task at hand in sections. Atlanta is a large city geographically, have a lot of people in it. There's a lot of various technologies that we have in various small spaces, and particularly for the Super Bowl, the certain confined area. But it doesn't make sense to try to do your deployment or do a major technology change across the whole thing all at once. You need to figure out how am I going to do this in sections. Do it like a ladder, rungs on a ladder. You don't just all of a sudden jump to the top rung. You take it step by step to make sure that you are successful in what you're doing. And that's just what I'm getting at in that. Don't just deploy it and say, I'm going to turn on the switch at the last second. Make sure everything works in sections. Go step by step. So ensure that the deployment plan has phases, basically milestones, set timelines on how that works. If possible, establish a previous working relationship with your solutions integrator to understand the level of client involvement needed to successfully complete the task. What did I mean by that? Simply make sure that you are comfortable with the knowledge of what your vendor is. So in our case, GC&E, we worked with them for several years, so we were comfortable in what their capabilities are. But if you're trying to deal with something that's critical and you have not established that rapport, you need to go ahead and figure out well ahead of time, how are we going to work this relationship? What are we going to have you work on smaller first to understand that you're capable and you will do as expected? And GC&E has proved themselves and done well with us in that. So, and also I'd have, do not overlook the little things. Examples, day versus night traffic, the two videos that I showed you. During the daytime, yeah, it was getting bad with the traffic, but at night, you were not driving through there. You could not get through certain areas in the city of Atlanta simply because of the volume of people. It's not a bad thing, but you need to account for that, especially in major events. Connectivity as well. trees, banners that going up to saying, hey, we have this latest and greatest event going on. Things that are not normally in the way, because right now it's still considered winter. You don't have many leaves. In the springtime, that'll be different for your wireless network. Also now you have more obstructions. Be mindful and try to forecast those things that could be in the way so that you can prevent a compromise of what your system has down the line. I didn't go into a lot of the networking details. I'm going to save that for the questions part, which this video can actually run during this time period. I just figured you guys might want to be able to see what it looked like from the air during the Super Bowl period. So this video is literally one of the helicopters that were flying. We had a restricted airspace perimeter around the Super Bowl area before the game and during the game, of course, just to help protect everyone. So this particular helicopter was just filming the jets that were flying in and showing it flying out. But during this video, if you have any questions, I'm going to be open to them. It doesn't have to be just on the Super Bowl or Operation Shield. This video is about 5 minutes long, though. So, because it's demonstrating the capabilities of this particular camera was a FLIR camera, so it's zooming out almost 30 miles out to begin with, and then watches them come in. So it's definitely a high-powered camera on an aircraft.
We got a question right here. Mike's coming right up.
Okay.
Did you do anything with real-time facial or object detection in the videos?
No, we did not. Actually, we do want to get to add more analytics into Operation Shield in the future. The reason we don't do facial recognition is because the cameras that APD deploys and most of the private partners that are shared with us are usually PTZ, pan, tilt, zoom cameras. For facial recognition to be successful, you typically need a certain amount of resolution, a reference point. That's kind of static. Say, hey, I have this much face in a whatever size image. With a PTZ camera, we're constantly moving the target. So that would not actually work for what we're doing currently. It doesn't mean we won't do it into the future, though. Now, what was the other thing other than facial recognition? Objects. We are not using object detection at the moment. Again, all of our cameras are deployed in the public space, meaning that there's nothing that's hidden behind a building. Everything is out in the open, primarily at intersections. So we always have people walking around. Objects it's not useful to us now, but it will be in the future. Object detection in the city of Atlanta would be more useful like in MARTR, which is our transportation system, because they would have train platforms. They would be able to say, hey, okay, I recognize that this platform should be pretty much clear when a train is already picked up and gone. In a place like that, it would be useful, but not necessarily on the streets at this time. You have another question? Okay.
So thanks for doing a great job on the Super Bowl. That was fantastic. So for the data that comes from the cameras, do you ever take data from like the patrol cars and stuff? Does that come into your environment? And then the second question I have was, in this stage of AI and behavioral analytics and things like that, do the cameras or do you guys look at the film and data coming in for potential patterns, behavioral patterns?
Well, the first part of the question about video coming in from patrol cars, not at this time, but that is actually something that our command staff is looking into presently. The desire is to actually be able to get the patrol car video into our centers live and be able to have it at the various commanders that may need it, as well as for us to push video that we're receiving that's relevant to a responding officer down to them. So that's something we're working on, but it's not there yet. As far as the actual analytics of being able to look at, or I guess you could say being able to process the data in that manner, we're not doing that yet. We do plan to do it. There's a lot of things that are on our roadmap. As a matter of fact, the PSIM software that I mentioned that's combining all these different resources, it's an object-oriented software, which you're basically trying to lay those different resources. But technology evolves, so we're looking to be able to see what can we do to enhance that functionality as well, including analytics. But we have to be careful on how we do that because you're affecting a large pool of data at one time. It's typically not targeted on just one camera. It's going to be across all. Another question?
Yes, sir. Again, thank you for your view into this process that we all kind of really like to hear. A couple questions, just they're related. What's your storage on all these cameras, and what, I guess, looking at that, it could be infinite, but what's your retention with regards to camera per? And then
Okay.
the other part of that would be, could you talk a little bit more about the Federation relationship that you guys have?
Sure. Okay, so for the APD owned cameras, we store our video for 14 days, and it automatically is overwritten. We don't keep anything longer than that unless it's of evidentiary value. It'll be burned off for whatever the case file is and given to the investigators. The actual storage, when you're talking about where is the data stored and how much storage we're using, cameras that are coming in over fiber technologies or over a wireless mesh essentially are coming back to one central location that APD has. The cameras that are coming in over a 4G solution are going to a cloud-hosted solution. As a matter of fact, it's the Genetec Stratocast. That's no secret on that. So in doing that, we're still using the same retention time period. We're hosting video in 2 different locations. So it's not taking up a ton of storage that we're having to manage on site. But at the same time, it's not all in the cloud either. The second part of your question, Federation, correct. So my mind's scrambled, I'm tired. Hey, the Super Bowl is over, but it's still been busy for us. But for the federations, okay, so we do have many different private partners that are federating to us. If they're using Genetec, for instance, which is the video management system that APD is currently using, then we'll do a direct federation. In other words, they'll share their video straight with us, and we can do vice versa. The surveillance systems that are coming from other VMS systems, those are coming into the PSIM. So again, we're still using fiber optic connections or VPN over some type of internet connectivity to be able to get those systems in. But those private partners, we never record any of their video. That way they're not subject to Georgia Open Records laws. We're basically making sure that they understand this is a trust relationship between the police department and all other entities. We won't violate that trust. We are only recording what we have, our own data. We do never record anybody else's. You're welcome. Another question?
Thank you. Are you able to discuss any potential breaches or opportunities to say you defended against cyber attacks during this time?
During that time, there was no actual true breaches. With cellular connectivity, you do have sometimes, if let's say for instance, a device runs its own web server, just using a general example. If a device runs a web server and is sitting on the edge, there's a potential for that to be compromised, but those devices, like I mentioned that we have 4G, are actually air-gapped because they're going to a cloud service. From the cloud service, they have to come to us through various levels of firewalls. There's more than one. We're not doing just one and done. So there's several different air gaps in between that help prevent any malicious attacker from reaching the city network. Doesn't mean it's 100% impossible, but the city has actually taken a very proactive stance in making sure that they do various network scans. As a matter of fact, actually, after last year's event, we also have increased, I hear a lot of laughing. After last year's incident, the city has increased its frequency on network scans. They've also engaged in many different security partners that are helping secure the network as a whole. And those reports are the different things that they find. They make sure that they let the various stakeholders, because, for instance, Department of Watershed Management or Department of Public Works, they're separate government entities, but they're all in the same city. We're all working together. They may run their own portions of the network, but we'll all be responding to what the central IT department would be when it comes to security. So we do make sure we take a proactive stance on that. As a matter of fact, The Video Integration Center itself is essentially a segmented part of a network. It's not compromised by anything else, so despite anything that might have been, I don't think that anything ever came out. The breach that happened last year did not affect the Video Integration Center at all. I don't know if that's known, but just to let you know, it literally did not affect the VIC. The VIC runs as its own island, again with multiple levels of air gaps, so it was safe the entire time. Became a headache trying to get all the outside things back in, but but the VIC was safe. More questions? If not, I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Officer Sutton. Dennis and Jim are coming up on stage to give you a token of our appreciation.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Folks, are you ready for lunch? We're going to take an hour and a half for lunch so that we can get everybody through the buffet lines. The exhibitors are going to stay at their exhibit so that you can visit with them during this extended time. Please do come back when we reconvene approximately 1:40, 1:45. We do have some raffles that we